15 years, blowing the doors off the competition, podcasting to planet Earth.
PNRNetworks.com.
Now entering the PNR Networks arena, coming down the aisle from Revere, Massachusetts, weighing in at absolutely none of your business. It's the Mistress of Mayhem, the Queen of Quips. It's time for Ring Around the Rosie with your hostess, Kim Brown.
Hey everybody, welcome to another week here on Ring Around the Rosie. I am your hostess, Kim Brown, aka Platinum Rose Lady, coming to you on Tuesday the 14th of April 2020. I hope everybody is having a terrific week so far as we can all do that, you know, with things being the way they are in this brave new world or weird new world or however you want to put it, new world. I hope everybody's keeping healthy and safe. Kind of crazy, you know, right now being everything the way it is, but I think, you know, people are handling it as well as they can, which is obviously a good thing. And like I said, so much love to everybody out there. Hope everybody's doing okay, you know, and you're doing what we're supposed to do to keep each other safe, you know, social distancing, washing your hands a lot, you know, masks and gloves and all that good stuff like that. So this week, before I really get going with my subject for the week, I would like to talk about something that's been really helpful to my fella and I, because we are, you know, doing the whole staying at home thing, working from home thing, and all that stuff like that. Obviously, when you're home like this, you get bored and you have to find things to do. I have to find things to do because when I get bored, I start taking things apart and... you know, that nobody wants that, you know, because it's like you take stuff apart and you're like, oh gosh, where did this screw come from? That's not important. You know, so you have to find things to keep yourself occupied. So, you know, you watch TV and stuff like that, but if you find something that really catches your attention and is really fun, it can make the time go by and also something you can share with other people in the house and you watch stuff and it's really fun. One thing that we found that we really enjoy is it's a website. You can go on check it out on the internet. You can check it out on Roku if your TV has the Roku option, or Apple TV if you have that, because that's like some super cool computer thing, I guess. Computer television fusion thing. I don't know. It's technology that hurts my head. And that would be, the website is independentwrestling.tv. And, man, this thing is crazy. If you go to this site, you can look at all these independent wrestling feds from all over the country, you know, matches going back any number of years. You can search for individual wrestlers if you want on their search engine, which we've used on the TV because we go on there through our Roku. We've watched stuff from Black Label Pro. We've seen stuff from Beyond Wrestling, from other feds. I'm sorry, I can't think of everything off the top of my head. And it's been really fun, and it made me remember, oh my gosh, how much we used to love going to independent shows in and around Massachusetts back when we had a car, because we went to a lot of shows. We drove to a lot of places in this state that I'd never been to before, and we had a lot of fun. I mean, independent shows are so much fun. It's just got a different vibe. Not that the big shows aren't fun, you know, obviously, but you know, they're more expensive to get into. And when you go to an independent fed, you know, it's more grassroots, it's more organic, and I think that's really fun, and you see a lot of great people, and it's just a fun time, especially if you have a really good, exciting crowd. We just watched a couple of things last night, and it was really great. I mean, it was crazy and exciting and super duper fun. So check out independentwrestling.tv, and I think it's like $10 a month to subscribe, and you get all of this wrestling from all of these different places, and it's really, really cool. So definitely check that out and tell them you heard about it here on Ring Around the Rosie. So that is getting to this week's show. Now, this week's show is actually inspired once again by Viceland's The Dark Side of the Ring, which is a terrific, terrific show. Last week, their show was all about what has been referred to as the worst idea in pro wrestling, the Brawl For All. And as was talked about on that show by a lot of people who are a lot smarter than me, for the most part, I'm not naming names, this was a terrible idea. It was a terrible idea because people legit got hurt. People's careers legit got shortened. It was just a stupid idea. But for everyone who's like, oh, that's the worst idea in wrestling. Okay, it's one of the worst ideas in wrestling. It's not the only one. So I decided that I was going to run with that idea, and I decided that I was going to come up with my idea of wrestling's worst ideas. Now, this is just in my opinion. Nobody else's but mine. You don't have to agree with my opinion. And if you have your own lists, I would love to read them on the show. You can send them to me at platinumroselle@yahoo.com, and I will gladly read them on the show and give you full credit for it. Now, everybody does top 10 lists, which are great. Some people do top 20 lists, which are fantastic. I decided to do a top 17 list because it's my show. So, so these are the things that I came up with. They are not in any particular order other than this is what popped into my head at the time when I was thinking about each idea. And I'm just going to give a little reason why I thought these were all terrible. Now, before anybody sits there and goes, okay, so this is going to be a completely Kim slamming on the WWE for however long it takes. It actually isn't completely. I did try and come up with things from different federations, and some of these are federations that no longer exist, and one of them is a federation that hasn't existed for a long, long time, so ask your parents or your older brother or whomever, or go on the interwebs and look it up. So, beginning at the beginning, the XFL, the first time around. The idea that they had, to do wrestling and football and merging it together and calling it the XFL. Now, when the first time the XFL came out, it was a disaster because it deserved to be, because it sucked. The way the WWF was hyping WWE, we'll just say WWE for this whole show, even if some of this stuff happened when it was still WWF. The way the WWE was hyping how this extreme football league was going to be that extreme, they made it sound like they were going to strafe the field with machine gun fires and bears were going to be released at halftime or something. I was like, whatever they're going to do, it's not going to live up to the hype. And spoiler alert, it didn't. Also, simple fact and a complete, true confessions time here. I know jack doodly squat about football for the most part. I know kind of you get the ball from here to here and there's like points and stuff, but for the most part, I can't tell who's playing. I can't find the ball half the time and it's too damn long. So that's why I'm not into football. So we tried to watch it the first time around and we were just like, pass. And so was everybody else, because the thing is, if people wanted to watch football, they'd watch football. If they wanted to watch wrestling, they'd watch wrestling. If you wanted to watch some weird fusion of football and wrestling with Jim Ross and Jerry Lawler and wrestling kind of gimmicky stuff in football, you were in a very small minority because it completely tanked. So, next worst idea also is from the WWE, the World Bodybuilding League. Now, I know some of you definitely don't know what I'm talking about. This was another brainwave of Vince McMahon's. The idea was that they would get people interested in watching bodybuilding and, you know, have the WWE kind of flair and flash and style with bodybuilding and build people up so they're almost more like characters than actual bodybuilders. Oh, listen, crickets. That's pretty much the reaction this got. This was, other than the fact that this is how they wound up bringing in Lex Luger during his original gimmick, the narcissist. And I was like, this isn't going to work. Because those of us who remember our Greek mythology, I remember when they brought in Lex Luger and they brought him in with this narcissist gimmick. I'm like, okay. Narcissism or narcissist comes from a young man in Greek mythology whose name was Narcissus, and he fell in love with his own reflection in a pool and drowned, trying to embrace himself. I'm like, yeah, that's what you want to base a pro wrestler on. Great. Of course, and they tried to turn Luger face, but proved that you can wrap somebody up in the American flag and that doesn't automatically turn them into Captain America. But the World Bodybuilding League was pretty much, you know, I can't even say it crashed and burned because that almost indicates that it actually launched. And it definitely didn't launch. It just kind of exploded on the launch pad. Okay, changing gears completely, talking about another idea that was just a terrible, terrible idea. Going to the middle of the country, some of you may have heard of the AWA, the American Wrestling Alliance, which was, based out of, I believe it was Minnesota. And a lot of people came out of there. You know, Hulk Hogan had his start there and a lot of other people. One of their gimmicks that they were trying to be timely with at the time was a character called Colonel De Beers. Now, Colonel De Beers was from South Africa. Now, at the time, South Africa was under a government rule called apartheid, which was a terrible, stupid, horrible idea. It was basically racism jacked up to the nth, where you had the white minority treating the black majority of South African people in really dehumanizing ways. And it sucked, and thankfully apartheid has been destroyed in South Africa, and it should have been, because it's a terrible idea. Colonel De Beers was allegedly from South Africa, was allegedly part of the De Beers family. Yes, that De Beers. Diamond is forever De Beers, that family, yeah. And he used to come to the ring in military fatigues and the whole 9 yards. Now, his whole gimmick was that he was a racist. No, I'm not making this up. That was it. His whole gimmick was that he was this hardcore racist. I actually remember watching a match where he refused to get in the ring with someone because the person he was wrestling was an African American man. And his whole thing was that he refused to touch him. Now, it's not difficult to make a racist character, you know, it's not difficult to be a heel and be a racist character. It's just lazy as hell. And I remember thinking at the time, wow, we're really going to do this. Yep, so we did. It was just one of those, okay, this is a terrible idea moments. Speaking of terrible ideas, well, you can't talk about terrible ideas and not go back to the WWE. For one of their worst ideas ever, I'm going to put these two ideas back to back because they actually involve the same, in a roundabout way, they both involve the same person, and that was Kane. Obviously, one of the worst ideas the WWE ever came up with was the whole Katie Vick storyline. Katie Vick was allegedly a girl that Kane had been involved with, and there was an accident and she died and blah, blah, blah. Now, there was allegedly footage of Kane committing an incredibly illegal and morally reprehensible act with Katie's corpse, which was obviously a mannequin, and it was obviously Triple H in a Kane mask, and it was obviously really effing stupid. It was one of those moments where you sat there as a wrestling fan going, you know what, I'm just going to tell people I watch Japanese wrestling. That's it. It was one of those moments where you just like, you know what, anybody asks me if I watch the WWF anymore or E or whatever, I'm just going to lie and say no. The other moment that I really thought was, this one really irritates me because it was such a missed opportunity moment. Was later on in Kane's storyline that I thought it was a terrible idea. Where Kane lost a match, and because of losing the match, he lost his mask. So he had to unmask in the ring, and he, took the mask off very slowly, which also revealed the fact that his hair was actually attached to the mask, which bummed the heck out of me, because I was like, oh, he doesn't really have long hair? Crap. Yeah, I know. I'm shallow. What do you want? And the thing is, he's in the ring, takes his mask off, and the announcers are acting like his face is absolutely hideous. And his opponent in the ring, which I think was Rob Van Dam, is acting like he's terrified of what Kane looks like. And now we can see what Kane looks like. And he's got a little schmutz around his eyes, but that's it. I'm like, what? So the whole payoff was that Kane really wasn't, this hideously scarred figure. But everyone else was acting like he was. That was stupid. They had two options they could have done this with that would have made it so much better. They could have actually sprung for some prosthetics or something or anything that would have made Kane look slightly screwed up. Or they could have just had the announcers be like, there's nothing wrong with his face. Why does he think... Oh, he thinks there's something wrong with his face. But no, they played it like he took off the mask and he looked like, Two-Face from the Batman comics. I'm like, he's got some black makeup around his eyes. Big deal. It was really, really just dumb. I mean, there's more than one example of working with Kane that I thought was stupid, but those two are just truly, truly ridiculous. Also talking about wasted potential and also along the idea of this is just a terrible idea and the worst ideas involved in wrestling, and that would be bringing back ECW. Now, I say that and it hurts my heart to say it because I was an ECW fan. And when I say ECW, I mean the old ECW. The actual ECW, the real ECW, the ECW that was out of Philly and that was our little grungy, violent, sex-filled, carnage hour. That was, call it what it was. When the WWE announced that they were going to be bringing back ECW, I remember sitting there and I remember having a flashback to one of my favorite movies of all time, one of my favorite movie series of all times, I should say. I have a very bad feeling about this. And yeah, I think pretty much all of us could agree that, as my loving husband referred to it, WWECW was a terrible, awful, why in the frickin' fork are you doing this idea. When they had the first episode, which aired on the Sci-Fi Channel, oh boy, I'm like, oh man, this is just not gonna work. And one of the people they brought out was a guy named the Zombie, who got caned into oblivion by the Sandman. I was like, hey, that's not how you take care of a zombie. You're supposed to shoot them in the... Oh, we can't do that. No. I'm like, no, we can't do that. I was just like, this is not going to work. And spoiler, it didn't. I mean, there's a lot of things I will never forgive the WWE for. Trying to taint my memories of ECW is going to be one of them that I am going to never forgive them for. Ever. I mean, there's a lot of things on that list. Having Brock Lesnar be the one to end the streak, this, and a few other things, but that, seriously. Also on the list of wrestling's worst ideas, I think, now like I said, this is just my list, and if you guys disagree with me or if you think I'm wrong, I'd love to hear from you. When someone comes back to wrestling, one of two things happens with the fans. They go, oh my gosh, I can't believe it's whomever. It's been so long, welcome back. The other thing that happens is, you've got to be kidding. Never have I seen something go from, oh my gosh, I can't believe he's back, to, you've got to be kidding, as fast as it did with another one of wrestling's worst ideas, and that was the signing of the Ultimate Warrior to WCW. Now, I will be perfectly honest, when the Warrior first showed up in WCW, I was excited because there was just something about the Warrior that was exciting. The guy knew how to bring a crowd to their feet. And watching Hulk Hogan the look on Hogan's face when Warrior came out that first night when he came out to the ring, you know, Hogan looked like he'd literally just seen a ghost from his past. And that was the whole point of this angle behind the scenes, was that Hogan wanted to erase Warrior's previous WrestleMania victory against him, because Hulk Hogan sometimes has an ego problem, which is right up there with water is wet, the sun is yellow, and I am slightly oversexed. Now, the thing is, like I said, I think I and a lot of other people went from, oh my gosh, I can't believe this, to, oh no, within the first half hour of once the Warrior was back, because we're sitting there listening to Warrior's first in-ring soliloquy, monologue, insane rambling. I don't know how else to word it. Wow. You know, it was kind of one of those, well, he hasn't changed, he's still completely out of his mind, moments. Not to speak ill of the dead, but Jim Hellway could get on a mic and just completely ramble like nobody else's business. Then they started bringing in all of this weird supernatural stuff that Warrior could apparently do now that he could never do before, that would have been really, really useful in that angle against Papa Shango, back in the WWF. You know, they had him do all these weird supernatural things. The whole thing in the mirror where Hogan could see Warrior. We as the audience could see the Warrior, but Bischoff couldn't see the Warrior even though he was standing right next to Hogan. The whole Warrior teleporting business, the whole one Warrior nation, blah, blah, blah. It didn't work. It just didn't work. And to be honest, it made me kind of sad. You know, it really did make me kind of sad. Speaking of sad takes us to another one of wrestling's worst ideas. And I'm going to just say, now, a lot of people, when you hear a name involved in wrestling and you can just know it was a bad idea, Katie Vick comes to mind. Another name that comes to mind that just makes wrestling fans roll their eyes, Claire Lynch. Claire Lynch was part of a storyline in what was TNA back then, is now Impact, I think, or whatever it's called now. This was a storyline where AJ Styles was allegedly having an affair with TNA president Dixie Carter. Ugh. Oh. Sorry, that's an image I'm not going to be able to drink away. As it turned out, AJ and Dixie were not, in fact, having an affair. They were trying to help a woman named Claire Lynch, who was pregnant and also a drug addict. So, as it turns out, Claire says she's pregnant. She says AJ's the father. Turns out she's not pregnant. She's an actress. This whole thing has been put together by those scumbags, Christopher Daniels and Frankie Kazarian, to blackmail AJ, blah, blah, blabbity, blabbity, blah, blah, blah. This was, oh man, I remember sitting there watching this going, are we going to get the organ sting at any moment during this? Because this whole thing came off like an episode of All My Children. You know, if All My Children was written by, you know, a drunken sunflower or something like that. It was a mess. It was just terrible. It wasn't well written. It wasn't well acted. Just speaking from my own, you know, opinion of certain people's acting abilities. I won't say who. Certain people, we'll just leave it there. So moving forward with others of wrestling's worst ideas, this idea, I'm actually going to stick with TNA for a minute because this made me angry. This made me angry, and I know it made a lot of other people angry, and it should have made them angry because this was actually dangerous. This was actually a dangerous thing that TNA did because somebody decided to be an idiot. The wrestling idea, one of the worst ideas wrestling ever had or wrestling ever came up with occurred on March 13th, 2011, when some idiot in the back thought it would be a good idea to let Jeff Hardy walk out between those curtains at Victory Road and let him get in the ring with Sting to defend his belt, when it was exceedingly clear that Jeff Hardy shouldn't have been walking out of those curtains. Jeff Hardy shouldn't have been walking anywhere except into a hospital or whatever at the time. Jeff was really, really, really not fit to be in a wrestling ring at that point. And we had a match that was completely ridiculous, if you want to call it a match. 88 seconds. 88 seconds. You know, seriously. You had people yelling bullshit, and Sting actually replying to that, I agree. This whole situation made me mad as hell, because somebody decided to put not only Jeff's safety, but Sting's safety ahead of, common frickin' sense, The guy was clearly not ready to go out there. He was clearly not well enough to go out there. But they let him go out there, and that was a horrible idea, and whoever at TNA stamped that should be ashamed of themselves. Because that could have ended in an injury that could have literally ended someone's career or ended someone's life. So I'm sorry. Worst idea. Revolting. Shame on them for that. Sometimes a bad idea is a bad idea from the get-go. It's not even a question of it, some ideas start out being promising and then they just take a dive. Now, where that happens, one of the places where that happened, I should say, was with a storyline that was actually pretty interesting once it got going, and for a while it was intensely interesting, and then we get to the denouement, the unmasking and all that stuff like that, and it went straight downhill. And that was the WWE, the revelation during the whole Ministry of Darkness storyline. You had this whole storyline with The Undertaker and all of these other people that were forming this seriously dark, super goth, heel faction. And you had The Undertaker out there dressed and speaking like he was the head big bad in a D&D campaign. Not that I had a problem with that. But, he was even answering to someone else. The Undertaker was answering to a higher power, on and on and on. And that this whole feud was going on where Vince McMahon's family was being targeted. His daughter Stephanie, back when we actually cared about Stephanie, was, being, targeted by The Undertaker. There was almost this black wedding on TV, and Steve Austin was the unlikely savior, blah, 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 on and on and on. And then we get to the unmasking of the higher power, and it's Vince McMahon. And the whole wrestling world went, you have got to be fucking kidding. From what I've heard, originally the person that was going to be the higher power was supposed to be the fallen angel Christopher Daniels, which, to be perfectly honest, would have been amazing. I don't know why exactly things fell apart, and I don't know who decided, well, we'll just have Vince go out there, other than Vince deciding to go out there because he's Vince. But, oh my gosh, did that suck. That just took every ounce of interest and every bit of actual storytelling storyline, and tossed it in the shredder. Because the thing is, I realize this might shock some people out there, especially some wrestling writers, but when you have a beginning, middle, and end of a story, it's super duper helpful that when you get to the end of your story, that the end of your story makes sense. Doesn't have to make a lot of sense, this is still wrestling, but some sense. Some sense would be really, really nice. It just it was one of those moments that just made you want to scream because it completely chucked what was up till that point a very interesting storyline. Just absurd. Absurd, of course, then brings us into a couple of, this is jumping back to WCW, because, if I wanted to, I could sit here and just talk about wrestling's worst ideas and just talk about all of the things that certain people wrote for the WCW, Vince Russo. But anyway, tie-ins. Now, tie-ins in wrestling sometimes can be interesting and sometimes they can suck. We've obviously had a lot of people do tie-ins with horror movies in wrestling in like smaller feds and also in Japan. There's been a billion Jasons and Leatherfaces and Nightmare Freddy and so on and so forth and stuff like that. Because those are interesting characters and let's be honest, some giant guy running around with a chainsaw shooting sparks out is a really friggin' cool image. It looks really neat. Sometimes tie-ins are a bad idea from the jump. Both of them that I'm going to talk about now were from WCW. Oz. Kevin Nash, and I know Kevin is not the most popular person with some people in wrestling, fans and whatever, for whatever reason, but Kevin's still a human being, and for crying out loud, poor Kevin got stuck with some of the worst gimmicks in WCW. If they were not interesting, they were just flat out dumb. The Master Blasters, the whole Mad Max look, it had been done before, it's been done since, whatever. Vinny Vegas was, But Oz. Oz was a tie-in to the fact that the Turner Broadcasting Company, they owned the Wizard of Oz. And so they decided to have a character called Oz, and he came out with this big backdrop of the Emerald City, and his hair was green, and all this stuff like that, and I was like, what? I was completely like, why? Just give me a reason why. One reason why that makes sense. But since this was WCW, we didn't get it. And then later on, down the road in WCW, we get another tie-in. Not with a movie this time, but with music. With the debut of the Kiss Demon. Now this came along because WCW signed a deal with the rock band Kiss. Now, I realize that some people out there are going to want to kick my butt because of what I'm about to say, because the Kiss Army is still going strong, which is understandable. They put on an amazing show. They're an amazing band. They've been around since the 70s and have some of the best songs out there, And I love Kiss. Anyone who knows me knows I love Kiss. But when this happened, I remember thinking, oh no. And it went from oh no to oh crap. Because they had this wrestler who was, dressed as the Demon, which is Gene Simmons. That's the name of his character. And, he got into feuds with Vampiro. They started calling him the Demon Dale Torborg because that was his real name, which took all the mystique and chucked it straight out an open window. Now, the thing is, I guess we should all kind of count our blessings because if this idea had actually gone forward and actually taken off, because most of the fans were like, meh. Besides some of the fans, the younger fans who were like, who? I just actually hurt myself. How did I do that? It's like, let's be honest, Kiss has been around for a long time, but they haven't had an actual chart hit for a while. No accounting for the public's taste, but there it is. there were, from what I had heard, there were plans to, if the demon character took off, that there were plans that they were going to introduce wrestlers based on the other members of KISS, Star Child, Catman, Space Ace, Paul Stanley, Peter Criss, and Ace Frehley, respectively. And needless to say, because the demon went over as well as he did, which is not, that never happened. So I guess we can thank goodness for small favors, I suppose. We'll go with that. Sometimes an idea is a bad idea, and you know it's a bad idea from the beginning. You just sit back and know from the start, this is not going to work. And you can tell that even if we, the fans, are sitting there and sitting on our hands and not cheering or booing or whatever, that you know that wrestling companies are notoriously stubborn, especially the WWE, are notoriously stubborn for trying to run stuff down the fans' throats. That you will cheer for this person or you will boo for this person, and because we say so. And the fans usually will stick up a middle finger and go, fuck you. Now, one time when that happened, where it was a case of, instead of turning somebody face and people being like, no, we don't want them as a face, was turning somebody heel, and the fans went, nope. And then they had the person who was a heel now, or allegedly a heel, involved with another angle that was, if it was possible, even dumber than turning this person heel. What am I talking about? Of course, I know a lot of people already can figure out what I'm talking about, and that was the WWE's brilliant decision to turn Jim Ross heel. Now, turning Jim Ross heel didn't work, simply because people liked Jim. People liked Jim, and when they had Jim out there talking about how he was fired and, he had contracted Bell's palsy and he was fired and all this, that, and the other thing, he was out there saying all this stuff about Vince McMahon, who was also out there with this kind of wounded look on his face. They were making it obvious that we, the fans, were supposed to be like, oh, that ungrateful son of a bitch, Jim Ross. And instead, the fans were like, you know what? That was an awful thing they did to JR, and we like JR. Fuck you, Vince. And then, just to even, hammer that other nail into the coffin, you had this newly turned heel Jim Ross, and part of the way they turned him heel was having him beat up Michael Cole. I'm like, why don't you just have him pass out free money? For crying out loud. Why don't you have him hand out kittens into the audience, because people were cheering their brains out when he beat up Michael Cole? It's like crying out loud. You had Ross out there saying that he was bringing back Razor Ramon and Diesel. Now, this was after Scott Hall and Kevin Nash had hiked their butts over to WCW. So the fans were all like, what the heck is he talking about? And then Jim debuted Razor and Diesel. And we all went, really? Except for some of us who sat there and went, I fucking knew it. Because some of us, like me, I'm not trying to blow my own horn, but I was sitting there going, they're going to give them to different people. They're going to give those names to different people. And lo and behold, that's what happened. We had Rick Bogner, a.k.a. Big Titan, and Glenn Jacobs eventually came out, and they were supposed to be Razor Ramon and Diesel, because Vince got the brilliant idea in his head that wrestling characters were interchangeable, that you could have anybody with the name Razor Ramon or Diesel and the fans would accept it. And the fans went, fuck you. They went, fuck off. And they also went fuck off about turning Jim Ross heel, because the whole thing just died. And it deserved to, because it was a terrible idea all the way around. Another terrible idea was wasn't the idea was terrible so much as the overuse of the idea. And the fact that, simply put, it was overused and the way it was used was dumb. Now, gimmick matches aren't necessarily stupid. Gimmick matches can be really entertaining depending on what the gimmick match is. We obviously saw that with the Boneyard match from this past WrestleMania. Also, the Last Man Standing match. I mean, if you look at it that way, that's a gimmick match as well. But sometimes you have a gimmick match and you're like, okay, what? And what I'm talking about here was the plethora of on a pole matches in WCW. You had, contracts on a pole, you had Viagra on a pole, you had Judy Bagwell on a forklift, this, that, the other thing, because certain people, it's Russo, seem to think that fans love gimmick matches over and over and over again. No, we don't. The whole point of a gimmick match, in my opinion, is when you've hit a point in a feud where things have gotten so intense, or you've had people beating on each other, beating each other up in match after match after match, and then finally you're like, all right, that's it. We're going to do a contract on a match, on a pole match, or a whatever kind of gimmick match or whatever. If you had a gimmick match every other week, which goodness knows it seemed like WCW was doing for a while, it takes away the specialness of it. It takes away the uniqueness of it. And also the simple fact that sometimes the stuff that was on a pole was just stupid. I mean, there's no other way to put it. I would like to not include Judy Bagwell in the stupid part because that's rude. But, she is a human being and I'm trying to be respectful. But, it's like this whole thing was just a terrible, terrible idea from the go. Now, sometimes a terrible idea comes along, and there's just simply no other way to put it than it's a terrible idea. Now, a lot of people would take the attitude of, but you just said how much you loved ECW, Kim. How can you turn around and say that they had a terrible idea? I can say that because not every idea is perfect. I mean, ECW was the original ECW was an amazing time to be a wrestling fan. But not everything they did was perfect. And that brings me to what was also one of wrestling's worst ideas, and that was the whole issue that happened at the High Incident show in 1996, where you had this whole feud going on between Raven and the Sandman, which was a really deeply personal feud. Raven brought in Sandman's ex-wife and their child, and it was a complete mess, and it was just, But when you had the Sandman being crucified in the ring, with the Sandman, after getting the heck beat out of him, was tied to a cross and a crown of thorns, which was actually made of barbed wire, on his head. What the hell, you guys? Really? Seriously, what the actual hell? Now, stuff has gone severely wrong when the ECW crowd turned on you. When that bunch of psychos, and I mean that in the nicest possible way, felt like you crossed a line, you really done stepped in it. That whole debacle was the reason that Kurt Angle wound up not signing with ECW, because he was thinking about signing with them, and he was at the arena that night, and it was like, no, I'm not signing with these people. If you show this footage with me on it, I'm going to sue, because he was doing commentary. Stuff's gone really wrong when your boss makes you go out there and apologize for the whole thing. Paul Heyman made Raven go out and apologize for the whole crucifixion angle. It was kind of a half-assed apology, but it was an apology. So that kind of tells you that was a really bad idea. I mean, how often do you ever see somebody walk out at the end of a movie and go, yeah, sorry about that. That really sucked. Sorry. I mean, Tommy Wiseau would still be apologizing for The Room. Love you, Tommy. Anyway, now, this one really irritates me because this could have been a really interesting storyline if they'd stuck with it. But worst ideas, this is a worst ideas list. So WWE had an interesting idea when they brought in Muhammad Hassan and then completely screwed it up. When they brought in Muhammad Hassan, the whole thing of the character was that this was a young American Muslim man who felt like he had been disenfranchised and treated with prejudice by other Americans after the attacks of 9/11. And to be honest, that was a very controversial storyline, but it was actually a really topical and really timely storyline that if it had been handled properly, might have actually made some people take a step back and look at the way they were living their lives and maybe actually had some people think and make a change. Because it is a very sad and sorry condemnation of other Americans that after 9/11, there were unfortunately people out there who were striking out against Arab Americans or people that they thought were Arab Americans, you know, because people were angry over what happened on September 11th. And that's a terrible thing. People shouldn't do that. You can't blame other people who happen to be, you know, of the same ethnicity as someone else who did a terrible thing. You know, you shouldn't do that. I mean, there's people doing that now. I mean, we've heard about hate crimes that have happened with people, you know, of who aren't even from China or Japan, people who are, you know, Asian Americans being yelled at, being assaulted because people are saying, oh, it's your fault that, you know, people are getting, you know, COVID and all this stuff like that. That's stupid thinking. That is stupid racist thinking. Don't do that. Knock it off. We're all in this together. Don't do crap like that. But jumping back to Muhammad Hassan, now, like I said, if they had gone somewhere with this storyline that could have made people actually say, you know what? I'm looking at my life and I'm doing things that aren't cool. I need to step back and change the way I'm thinking. And they could have used that character to help people realize that. What did the WWE do? Completely the opposite. They had him start, you know, spouting off all this anti-American stuff. He was dressing in, you know, with the headgear that are worn by Arab men and all of that stuff. And then the whole incident where The Undertaker was attacked by his ski mask wearing companions, which unfortunately aired on the same day as the terrorist bombings in London. The WWE took the easy way out and made this character just another evil foreign heel. And that was lazy. It was lazy writing. It was one of the worst ideas that they ever had. Finally, and this is on a personal note, all of these are on a personal note, but this is the most recent one, I think. Turning Dean Ambrose heel toward the end of his run in the WWE was one of the worst ideas they had. It was one of the worst ideas they had because it was one of these cases where they just decided to go ahead with something even though real life came along and kicked everybody upside the head. Roman Reigns had announced that night that he was, you know, turning over the belt, stepping away from wrestling because he was dealing with leukemia. He had dealt with leukemia before and beat it, but it had come back. They decide on the same night to turn Dean Ambrose heel. Now, Dean Ambrose turning heel was obviously something they had been leading up to. But do they decide to put the brakes on this idea? Nope, they decide to go ahead with it. And I was like, this is one of the lousiest ideas they could ever have at a time when it would have made so much sense to keep Dean a face and have him still out there with Seth, who was a face, and have them out there fighting together as what was remaining of the Shield and fighting, you know, as their way of keeping their unity strong and showing, you know, solidarity with Roman and all that. Nope. They have Dean turn heel. They have him with this whole, I don't even know what the fuck you'd call it, gimmick, where the whole germaphobe Bane cosplay, I don't know what the fuck it was, but it fucking sucked. It was fucking stupid. And to have him go out there and say something, it was one of the things that he said that was basically like, I'm paraphrasing, but it was something to the effect of that Roman, his leukemia came back because of the things he did in his life. And I was like, whoever wrote that line, fuck you. Fuck you. That was a shitty thing to write, and then to make Dean go out there and say it, and I'm sure as a person that probably hurt his heart to say that. I mean, that was one of the worst, lousiest, dumbest ideas the WWE ever had. So that's my list of 17 of the worst ideas in wrestling. If I've missed something, I know I've missed some. I mean, but everybody's got, their own ideas about what's a good idea and what's a bad idea. Definitely let me know. As I said, platinumroselle@yahoo.com. And, if you'd like to send me anything, you can send it there. If you want to follow me on Twitter, you can follow me on platinumroselle@twitter.com. I'm on there a lot. And if you would like to take part in all of the other little things that our little island of misfit toys have going on, we have a bunch of other shows that you can look at on our web pages, and that are all designed by my sweetums, my Mzade, my Puddin, TC, who is brilliant when it comes to computer stuff. I just sit here in front of a mic. He's the technical genius. I'm the cute one. And you can check out all our other shows and all the other shows that are part of our little network, like I said, and some of them are from our friends, and they do great work too. So, that is going to wrap it up for another week here on Ring Around the Rosie. I hope you guys had a great listen. I hope you had a laugh or two in these crazy times. I hope I gave you a smile. And this is Kim Brown signing off for another week. And don't forget to stop and smell the roses. See you around. Bye.
You have been listening to Ring Around the Rosie with Kim Brown, a production of PNR Networks. Keep in touch with all things about the show at http://ringaroundtherosie.net. Ring Around the Rosie intro performed by Eric Lyon. Ring Around the Rosie theme by Digital Juice. Join Kim for a new Ring Around the Rosie every Wednesday. Ring Around the Rosie is copyright 2018 PNR Networks, Boston, Massachusetts, USA.
15 years, blowing the doors off the competition, podcasting to planet Earth.
PNRNetworks.com